that we all keep our devices on mute so that we don't interrupt the speakers as the proceedings go. And then also, if there, like I said, any chats, I will gather the questions and post them to the speakers during our Q&A session as we go along. So this morning's talk, whistleblowers, heroes, villains, or victims. Whistleblowing plays a vital role in society in bringing wrongdoing to light. Yet despite being offered protection through legislation and internal company processes, many whistleblowers still suffer significant harm. Today, we are joined by Liezl Groenewald and Brett Hamilton as they draw a first-hand account of South African whistleblowers and explore what to do when confronted with wrongdoing and how companies can best encourage whistleblowing. So today I'm pleased to introduce to you guys Liezl Groenewald, the Senior Manager for Organisational Ethics at the Ethics Institute in South Africa, an immediate past president of the Business Ethics Network of Africa. Liezl holds a master's degree in applied ethics and is currently a PhD candidate in applied ethics, Stellenbosch University. Liezl has been in the field of organizational ethics since 2004, and her main proficiencies include auditing whistleblowing service providers and advising whistleblowers. Liezl has an extensive wealth of experience, so we are quite privileged to have her sharing with us this morning. She is joined by Brett Hamilton, who is a visiting faculty member at the University of Stellenbosch Business School, where he teaches corporate finance on the MBA program. He has gained extensive experience in media, FMCG, agriculture, and property development, and he is a director of First Rand Capital, a boutique firm that specializes in strategy, corporate finance, mergers, acquisitions, and buyouts, and private equity. And he is currently completing a postgraduate diploma in applied ethics at Stellenbosch University, Department of Philosophy. Only to mention a few of his achievements. So that brings me to the pleasure of handing over to Liezl and Brett for this morning's discussion.
Yes, thank you very much, Jermaine, and welcome to all participants. Sorry for any technical issues. We are letting you all in, but we're going to continue and you can just catch up on any of the recordings. I have the great pleasure of welcoming Liezl. Liezl, I'll get to you just now. I just want to thank, first of all, Jermaine and the alumni chapter of the Western Cape of USB for facilitating this session, this very important session, I feel. And then also Christelle and Liezl and a few others at the Alumni Association of USB. We had our graduation or MBA graduation or USB's graduation session yesterday. So the Alumni Association has grown by a few members over the last 24 hours, and hopefully some of you have logged in today. But yeah, thank you very much for USB for making this, and the Alumni Association for making this opportunity available. And on that point then, Liezl, I want to thank you also from the Ethics Institute for making your time available for what I believe is a very, very important topic. From my credentials, you would notice that Liezl is the expert and I am not necessarily the expert on this topic. But I do feel that it is a crucial thing to talk about, and it is a discussion that needs to be had. It's a very important debate to start having, and I feel that business schools have a place or a role to play in those discussions. So thank you very much for all of you who have joined us. I believe all of you care deeply about this topic, and we would want to start the learning process to better understand what whistleblowing is, what role it plays, and what challenges there are there. To be honest, as an academic, as experts, sometimes we are not actual whistleblowers. Some of us are. But what is important to understand is actually that what whistleblowers go through. And Liezl has gained extensive experience, first-hand experience of South African whistleblowers what motivated them, what have they gone through, and sort of learnings that we can take away from to sort of enhance whistleblowing as a practice to avoid wrongdoing. So thank you very much, Liezl, and we're going to start the conversation. And I think it's important perhaps to first start with a broader question to say, well, what is whistleblowing? Sort of to set the scene for the following discussion. What is whistleblowing in your mind?
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Brett. I think I should hand over that question to one of the people in the audience who probably knows more than I do, Nico. Anyway, no, okay. So Brett, there are different views worldwide in terms of how whistleblowing is defined. And legislation to say where people can blow the whistle. So some countries say no, you can only blow the whistle to external authorities. Others say you have to report to the directors of the organization, or that's the Australian view, for example, report to the auditors of your organization, and so on. But in general, what whistleblowing is when an employee or a worker, as our Protected Disclosures Act defines an employee, when a worker has noticed something untoward, not just illegal activities, because some countries only focus on illegal activities. In South Africa, it is about illegal activities, dishonest acts, and misconduct. So there, for example, one would also talk about bullying or sexual harassment. But it is when that person, either current or former, reports that information to a person or a body that they believe can have an effect. And for me, that is the most important part of this definition, is a person reports something because they believe that the organization will do something. They believe that the organization will act on their report. And unfortunately, that does not happen that often. And that is where we see, for example, Cynthia Stimple, who's the SIA whistleblower, and she reported it she actually reported it to Treasury, that misconduct or corruption that she has seen. But Treasury didn't do anything about it. And that is when she then went completely external and public. And that's one of the things where our organizations dismally fail, in that they don't act on what has been reported.
Yeah, no, so it's important to understand from a whistleblower's perspective that it's not just gossip, I guess, meaning it's not just talk in the corridors. It's not you complaining to even your colleagues. It's not you going home and then complaining about something at home to your family and friends. It is a structured or a processed activity or action.
Exactly.
And I think that's very important to understand, especially if you want that activity to be protected in some way.
Exactly. So that is why it's incumbent on organizations to provide whistleblowing channels, and not just one. Some organizations believe that if you have a external whistleblowing hotline, for example, that's enough. But many people feel uncomfortable with that. So they would rather want to report to their manager. And research that I have done together with a colleague of mine, Dr. Paul Foster, in 2019, showed that 42% of employees in corporate South Africa actually prefers to their direct manager. But that is then also where things go wrong, because their direct manager does not necessarily know how to deal with that report. Okay. And they also don't know, how exactly to keep the information confidential, and more importantly, keep the identity of that whistleblower confidential.
Let's maybe I'm jumping the gun here a little bit, but let me talk about that confidentiality. How important is that? And how is it protected in your experience?
It isn't. That's why we get where we are. No, it is extremely important because if the information isn't treated in a confidential manner, it can lead to victimization or occupational detriment, as our Act defines it. But so obviously that information will go to the investigator, but the idea is not that that report goes to all and sundry. I've worked with organizations where the whistleblowing report is presented as is to the Social and Ethics Committee, to the Audit and Risk Committee. And that is not what you want to do, because then you open channels for leaking of information, and you also increase the chance that the whistleblower will be identified. Because even if a person reports anonymously, it is sometimes not too difficult to deduct who it was that reported.
Absolutely, yes. So maybe to get back on track, because we will definitely talk about what companies actually do or should be doing at the end. But let's take it one step back and just ask then, well, I asked you to come and talk here, so I should have an answer for it. But why are we talking about this? Meaning, why is it important to talk about whistleblowing? Why is whistleblowing important? Why should we care? Meaning, why should we care about it?
We should really care a lot. And in South Africa, the main reason for, not the main reason for caring, but we have to think about what would we have not known if it wasn't for whistleblowers. For example, state capture, we wouldn't have known about that. Yes. In terms of, we think a bit further, or long time ago with Wendy Addison, who reported or blew the whistle on LeisureNet. Some of us are old enough to remember what LeisureNet was about. We would not have known about the corruption in SAA, VBS Bank, etc., etc. So it is important for society that people speak up or blow the whistle. There's a difference between speak up and blowing the whistle, which I won't go into now. But it's important because, you know, corruption has a dire effect on society. So we see that in poor service delivery. We see that in roads, the maintenance of infrastructure, and all of that results from corruption. Or can we say appointing incompetent people that doesn't meet the criteria for the job. You know, and if someone needs to blow the whistle on that. If we think of Murray and Roberts, for example, not too long ago, one of their bridges just, you know, fell apart there. I think it was on the M1 in Gauteng. And that is due to corruption. So we need whistleblowers to tell us about that. In terms of business, we if people don't report on unethical behavior, we can end up with products, for example, that's unsafe. You know, we can end up with food that is contaminated, and all of that has an effect on the customers, the clients, the suppliers, the contractors, and ultimately on the reputation of the organization. So yeah, so if there aren't whistleblowers, we are not going to know any of these things, and we, as people of society, will be harmed. Our taxes will, you know, go to people's pockets and not to where it should go.
So in this sense, I think we're already discussing or heading to in a certain direction to say that whistleblowing is good. So it's something that should be encouraged. However, in my experience and certain discussions that I've had, and this coming from whistleblowers also, there are definitely narratives around whistleblowing that is around in society. So, for example, it was a very good question from one participant, a student of mine, who asked, are whistleblowers simply motivated or pushed towards whistleblowing in order to settle a score, meaning they have been burnt in, meaning they are complicit or they have been involved in certain behavior and now they are not involved, or they've been burnt in some way and now it is payback time and they will settle the score? That is definitely one narrative that I think people, how they view whistleblowers. Is this fair? Is this fair?
Look, in some cases, that is true. People want to settle a score. Malicious reporting, for example, disgruntled employees. Just a bit back in our Protected Disclosures Amendment Act actually makes malicious reporting a criminal offence, and one can go up to 2 years to jail or a fine or both. But yes, the narrative is there. There is a stigma on whistleblowers, which is unfair, because the majority of whistleblowers do it actually from the heart. Okay? There are 3 factors that plays in the minds of whistleblowers, in that we look at personal factors, we look at situational factors, and we look at cultural factors. So in terms of personal factors, you will find that whistleblowers in general are people with staunch morals. Okay, they usually have been working in an organization for a longer time. It's not the person who has worked there for 1 year that blows the whistle. It's usually people that have worked there for a little bit longer and they care about the organization. So people say that whistleblowers are disloyal, but in fact, they are loyal to the organization. They want the organization to succeed. Okay, so they're motivated by their morals and their beliefs, and that can also be religious beliefs. It doesn't matter. They are motivated from within to do the right thing. When we look at situational factors, all of the whistleblowers that I have been speaking to over the years and in the research that I have been doing will tell you that they thought they will be supported by their family and by the organization, which unfortunately is not always the case. So the organization don't support them, and in some cases the family turns on them, and they, like Bianca Goodson, got divorced in the process. Her parents actually advised her not to report because they were scared of what would happen to her, but also to the family. And then you look at cultural factors, and this I find very interesting, is that people, in some cultures, there's a high interconnectivity, or like in Ubuntu, a collectivist value system. So we think here of Africa, and we think of, for example, Taiwan and China, where the community, members of the community rely on each other. They work towards peace and harmony in their community. And when a person then reports, they are ostracized, which, which is very sad. But then you look at independent cultures such as United States, Australia, where people, where they are taught, you do your thing, your own thing. You're an individual and you act according to your principles. So no, they are not all snitches and traitors and so on. But I just want to look, I can talk a lot about this, as you can hear. Just want to get to Angelo Agrizzi, for example. Sure. There are many people, and I know that David Lewis of Corruption Watch does not view him as a whistleblower. But because Agrizzi admitted that he was involved in the corruption at Bosasa, I find that refreshing, that from the very start, he admitted that he has been involved. And now he wants to come clean. And he had his Damascus moment and so on. While others say, no, he only reported now because he wants to turn state witness and not be held accountable. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and so I think it's important to understand the different motivations of employees. Only viewing it perhaps from one viewpoint, especially if you're an organization looking at developing internal processes for whistleblowing, meaning certain channels that need to be followed, etc. Looking at it from only one type of angle is perhaps limiting the ability of employees, making them know that there are different ways of doing it that perhaps is better aligned with their motivations. So we've spoken a little bit, and you've mentioned it already, about the things that actually happen in practice, because we do have protections, and we'll talk a little bit about the protections a little bit later. But I think it's clear that the fact that there are laws and the fact that there are these internal processes in companies that are either voluntary or prescribed in some way, says that whistleblowing is good. We've said already now discussed why it is good in society to have it. And then maybe to stretch it a little bit to say, well, given these protections, whether they're good or not, we will talk about that later, but given these protections, maybe it's expected of someone to blow the whistle. The question then is why, and maybe you can elaborate on the types of consequences. I know you have first-hand experience in this, but why are there then still, or why do we still see harm against whistleblowers? Why does that still happen as a consequence?
Brett, yes, they are viewed as by some as, sorry, I'm reading one of the messages there. Thank you, June. No, you know, people are scared. Organizations are scared. They are concerned about what the whistleblower is going to reveal in terms of, you know, about the organization. And they know very well that if the wrongdoing in the organization is exposed, that, okay, one, there will be immense reputational harm. Their share price will fall. They will, sorry, now I've lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. And then obviously there will be fines. So they don't want their unethical conduct to be exposed. And we have different, we have organizations in different modes of morality. And you will find that organizations that are in a compliance mode, they will, in other words, it's a rule-based approach to the organization's ethics. They will encourage the reporting of unethical conduct. And also those organizations that are in the integrity mode of morality, where values have been inculcated. And but then you have organizations that are in the reactive mode, and it's those organizations that don't tolerate whistleblowing because they have ethical standards, but they are not well enforced, and people don't really care about ethics. It's all about the money at the end of the day. And that is why people are actually scared, or organizations are scared of whistleblowers. And sorry, Brett, and that's another reason, and I think there are people in this audience that can attest to it, or might even later on elaborate on it, is that whistleblowers become unemployable, so they say. I think someone like Bianca Goodson has applied for something like 100 and something jobs, and now she's created or established her own company. So organizations should actually be very happy when, you know, to appoint a whistleblower, because that person will be able to see the gaps, not to go and blow the whistle again, but to tell the organization, to tell the board, look, this is what is wrong, or this is what can go horribly wrong. So focus on that. But now, yeah, they're scared, which is terribly sad.
So what type of protections are there for whistleblowers, meaning in the current state of affairs? And I know it's no laws are perfect and no rules and processes are perfect. And this is a relatively new law. So you mentioned the Protected Disclosures Act already. But what sort of protections are there available to whistleblowers?
Not very many. Our act is viewed as one, our Protected Disclosures Act is viewed as one of the best actually in the world. There has been studies in this regard, but it provides only against a protection against occupational detriment. And occupational detriment includes a whole lot of things, but it includes, for example, victimization. It includes that, you know, if I was in a position where I could make decisions, that power is now removed. I'm being demoted. I am being chucked in the last furthest corner on the southern part of the building where no sun will ever reach me, you know, that kind of occupational detriment. And but it is incumbent on the whistleblower to then go to court and sue, it's a civil matter, charge the organization, and then the whistleblower has to prove that he or she was victimized or suffered occupational detriment. Now there, Brett, comes another problem, because your whistleblowers mostly have lost their job, okay? Or they have left. They have either been dismissed because of some very trivial thing, or they have left because they couldn't handle the situation anymore. Now, no income. So how are they going to afford the lengthy court proceedings? And that is how organizations get away with it. Okay. What is very nice about the European Union Whistleblowing Directive, which comes into effect on the 17th of December this year. What is excellent about that, and I hope it changes across the world, is that the onus rely on the employer to prove that they did not victimize the person, the whistleblower. So that will be a nice shift. Brett, otherwise, we don't have a lot of protection. You know, people's lives are threatened.
Yes.
So, but you know, it's basically something like, who cares? There's someone in this room who has suffered health-wise tremendously at a very young age, already had not a heart attack, the other one. Anyway, you understand. Sorry, a person there in the room that I can't get it right now. And it's because of stress, and it's because of the stress being experienced because of what I've done. I've blown the whistle, and that is, it has had a huge impact on my family. Thank you, Celia, for the word stroke. Someone in the room has had a stroke and has suffered severely since then. Yeah, so I don't think that there's enough protection, seriously, and I don't know what we're going to do. There are suggestions that we must get an independent organization, and in the Netherlands there's one, they call it Huis voor Klokkenluiders. That's the house for whistleblowers. I just love the word klokkenluider. And so, and that is a fantastic organization, because there you can go as a whistleblower and they will arrange legal support for you. They will arrange psychological support, and they will arrange financial support, and they will even investigate. If we can, I know, if we can get that in South Africa, and there are people pushing for that, it would be extremely great.
Yeah, no, and I think it's important to understand on that point that most of our laws are sort of reactive in nature. It's in retrospect. It's after the fact. And what's tricky about that is that we expect whistleblowers to be proactive, yet the laws, and we call them protection laws. We call them protections, but they're not really protections. It's be proactive, perhaps suffer harm, most likely suffer harm. And if you have suffered harm, you may be restituted in some way, meaning restored in some way, which is not guaranteed either. So there's quite a large responsibility put on the shoulders of the whistleblower. The person in the room who suffered a stroke, I'm very sorry about that. But there's a case, I mean, the stress of simply the action itself, going up against let's just say in an organization, invariably that is not just an individual action that someone blows the whistle against. It's not a colleague that takes money from the till or something. It is usually a institutional problem, meaning it's a societal problem that you're taking on. So it goes beyond the individual action. So you are fighting against a system, you are fighting against a way of doing things, let's call it then a culture. And in many cases, you are going to fight that culture, and that change that is required is then placed, or at least the jump start of that process is then placed on you. You have that responsibility. And like I said, if it's good and if it's expected, that is then your responsibility to do so. The only problem is protections after the fact isn't actually protections. It's more restorative in nature, which doesn't help if you are going to suffer physical harm. Or we're talking about individuals here now, but what about, I know the PDA isn't necessarily clear on this, but globally also, what about those who aren't the whistleblowers, but who have supported the whistleblower or helped in exposing the problem? What about their families? What about people who helped outside of the organization, which according to the PDA is then not protected because you're not an employee or as they would define, a worker? So there's actually a lot of work that needs to be done. I think the protections that are there are commendable, meaning we've come a long way from nothing to a lot. But if you look at the actual practice, the harm that has occurred to these individuals, there's still a lot that needs to be done. There's still a lot to be advocated for. So let me ask this then. How can a whistleblower, you see something, you want to do something about it, maybe we'll get to the question, should I do something about it, a little bit later if we have time.
Yes.
But the question then is, if I decide I want to do something about this, how do I ensure that the harm that can come my way is limited? Meaning, are there best practices? Are there suggested ways? Or is it simply do not blow the whistle?
No, blow the whistle, but know that it's going to come with a price. And there again, I want to refer back to the staunch morals that our whistleblowers, or the majority of whistleblowers actually have. So they act from conviction. But no, how to blow the whistle? Again, people will, whistleblowers will know the best to answer this. But within organizations, there are whistleblowing mechanisms in place. And to be protected by the PDA means that we should first follow all those internal channels. And only thereafter, if nothing has happened, can we go external, either to the media or the public protector or whoever we feel we want to go. The thing about protecting yourself as a whistleblower is, and no offense to any of the high profile whistleblowers, but what I always, or not just even high profile, but I always in workshops with employees encourage them not to blow their own whistle. So some employees blow the whistle anonymously, only to go and tell everyone else that they have blown the whistle anonymously. Okay, so in that process, they actually expose themselves and should then be ready for what is going to come or could come their way. Taking on a whole system, which is what happens in all the big cases that we know about, and even some of the cases that we don't know about, requires moral courage. And I think, you know, whistleblowers they want to do the right thing, and ultimately, I believe they should do it in the way that they feel comfortable with. But they should keep the information confidential, and in that way, at least they can protect themselves to some extent, and also their identity, if at all possible. That's the best advice I can offer. Again, I think on the floor there will be people who can actually elaborate on that.
Sure. And I think it's very important also, this is a nice quote, I can't remember who it was, but it was from a whistleblower who basically just said that all things being considered, the last point is sort of just don't expect a thank you. So even though this may be a good thing and you're doing the right thing, you're not necessarily going to get the support that you might expect or may have wanted. You maybe even be aware that you're going it alone, but you're definitely not going to be necessarily thanked from those who should be thanking you about your action. Let me then flip the switch a little bit then. So the one thing is, how can whistleblowers limit this harm? But then what can companies do? So number one, if we talk about harm, it's not only the whistleblowers who suffer harm. So that's a significant thing. And companies, I think, have the responsibility to protect whistleblowers in that sense. So that's one point I want to ask you on. But then, I mean, the harm that companies also experience because of these things, I mean, reputation, trust, employability, and so on and so forth. So there are two things here. You would want to protect whistleblowers to encourage whistleblowing within your organization. But then also why you want to do that is because I think in the long run, exposing wrongdoing in the organization is probably better than trying to hide it and let it come out at some point in the future, meaning you want to be viewed as a trusted and responsible company. So what can companies do to limit this harm? Maybe then the two questions is to themselves as a company, to itself as a company, but then more importantly, I think for our discussion here today, to the whistleblower. How can they protect the whistleblower?
Okay. Let's talk about the whistleblower first, Brett. It's many organizations finally have implemented non-retaliation policies or in their whistleblowing policy, which they are by law required to have. They have a part that says we will protect the whistleblower from victimization, etc., etc. Unfortunately, it's in most cases it's just words on paper, and I don't know. I haven't come across anyone or any organization who has actually had success with that. Yet again, there is Nico in the audience that might perhaps want to tell us whether their or his organization is able to protect whistleblowers. But when, okay, so that's protecting the whistleblower. It's acting on what we say we do. In terms of how they can protect themselves, is that one, they have to act on the whistleblower's reports. They have to take it seriously because the effect to them will be dire if they don't listen. And I mean, we see with Boeing, for example, with that MAX 757 or whatever it was, that airplane that fell, there were, I think it was 12 whistleblowers that warned them that something is wrong. But no, they didn't want to listen because it's just about the profit. We are not going to listen to you. So listen to whistleblowers. It's what I just can tell organizations. Listen to them and act on their reports because they are telling you the truth 90% of the time.
And then maybe, I mean, offering protection, not protection, sort of offering ways of blowing the whistle, making it easier for the whistleblower to do in an organization. What if a company, or what if you suspect that the company, well, you're not suspecting, you know that the company is probably doing something wrong, and you're not quite sure who is involved. What do you as a whistleblower then do? If I mean, technically you should report internally first, if you feel that that's probably the most effective way. But what do you then do if you don't want to report internally? Is it okay to go external? Is it okay to speak out up or blow the whistle, not speak up? Is it okay to blow the whistle outside of the organization?
Yes. If the situation in the organization is such that you know nothing is going to happen when you report, or that you will be immediately ousted, one can go directly to an external authority. I think of Bianca Goodson, who went directly to the previous public protector and didn't even bother to report within the organization, because she just knew nothing is going to happen. And she will still be protected because of the circumstances that was in the organization where she can possibly prove that nothing would have happened when she reported internally first. Yeah, by all means, yeah.
On that note, then, I mean, how can a company then ensure? I mean, basically, the discussion that we're having here is that it's the right thing to do. You really should do it, and if you have the moral conviction to do so, please do so. But it's not going to be nice. Which is a terrible thing to say, actually. But then how can we, and maybe let me not say we, how can a company then ensure, or at least ensure or let employees know that there is a safe space for them to blow the whistle? How do you make sure, I mean, having channels, having an anonymous tip line or a suggestion box or however it is, I mean, those are all processes that are there. How do you ensure that your employees are safe, number one, or protected in this case, using the word in a different way? And how do you let them know that it is something that will be acted upon? Because if you look at the evidence out there in the real world, we don't really see a lot of that. So how do you then ensure that as a manager or as a CEO?
Okay. I'm glad you asked that question. Again, it is about the organization taking reports seriously. So employees, what organizations must do is create a culture where it is okay to blow the whistle. I don't want to say, I don't like the word whistleblowing culture. It sounds a bit,
sure.
I don't like the word, but where it's okay to talk about what you have seen or reported. And they will only know that it is okay that when they see that something has actually happened, that the reports are taken seriously. So other than, for example, having the channels in place and the policies and doing training and awareness creation, all of those lovely things, we have to give feedback to our whistleblowers in the organization. So either directly, if we know who the whistleblower is, and that is also a requirement of the Protected Disclosures Amendment Act, that feedback must be given to whistleblowers. But in many instances, the reports are anonymous. And so how do we give feedback to anonymous reporters? And that is very easy to do. And also, easy to do by, for example, on a quarterly basis, publish the statistics to say that in the last quarter, there were 10 disciplinary cases regarding bullying, 3 dismissals because of theft, 2 final written warnings because of X, Y, and Z. That just tells our whistleblowers, or not just our whistleblowers, it tells our employees that, look, we take unethical conduct. We don't tolerate it. We don't want it in the organization. It's not part of our culture. And if you see it, please speak out about it. It's about that action and communicating with the whistleblowers and the employees.
Yeah, and I think it's important with that communication is obviously, it can be a individual communication, meaning I know the PDA requires specific feedback to a whistleblower given a certain time frame on the complaint, the investigation.
Yes.
But I think from a cultural point of view, making that sort of communication the norm to the external environment is also then, I think it will be a brave thing for a company to start doing those types of things that you've mentioned now. But I think it will be important because it's about attracting the right employees, retaining those employees, letting them know that they will be protected, and you need to communicate that to the outside world. And I think the days of thinking that whistleblowing only occurs with a few bad apples in an organization and only a few bad organizations, it's not necessarily like that. It is perhaps more prevalent than we are even now aware. Which means you're going to come across certain of these behaviors, and to attract employees, to let them know that this is the culture that we want in our organization. I think it's quite important to make that communication, or at least decide what will I communicate as an organization to the outside world to position myself. There in this week, there have been 3 examples of whistleblowers in prominent companies overseas. So Volkswagen was one of them, Nissan was one of them, where the companies didn't treat those employees too well. Some of them stayed on at the company, but a lot of the focus that they mentioned there was on communication, in terms of not knowing what the outcome of any of these investigations are. Exactly. So if you want an employee to take action against something that is wrong, I think it's the responsibility of the company then to follow through on that action. Let me just ask you then this, how, maybe it's a bit unfair to ask you these specific types of questions, but suppose you suspect that there's something wrong. How much responsibility do you have in order to do the investigation yourself as a whistleblower before whistleblowing? Or do you just leave it alone and wait for something to develop? Meaning, are you a PI? Are you a private investigator being around for things? Or is it something that needs to be clear and obvious?
You know, there are whistleblowers who go that route and find evidence. I'm thinking here of Ethel Williams, for example, of Angelo Agrizzi, who, you know, gathered the evidence, and that is great. They put themselves out there in the sense that they could have been harmed in the process, but they went that route. But there are, well, what I usually tell employees in an organization is that, you know, you're not the investigator, okay, but you must have a reasonable belief that what you are reporting is true. And then it is incumbent on the organization to find the evidence to prove it. Very often there are organizations that say they don't allow anonymous reporting. I mean, they are just putting off so many people because, you know, people are scared and they don't want their names known. So if you don't provide them with that anonymous opportunity, you are missing out. And that unethical conduct will become the norm in the organization. And obviously, is that not what you want? So we want our whistleblowers to provide or to report what they see, what they are, what they're observing, what they know about, even if it's not something that's happening now or has happened. Our Act also says something that is about to happen. Okay, so you can also report that. But if it's going to put oneself in danger to gather the evidence, I advise, no, don't do that. But when you report, one must be clear. You must say who is involved. When did it happen, or when do I think it's going to happen? How did it happen, etc. Yeah. So otherwise it becomes a bit difficult to investigate it.
100%. And Liezl, maybe just wrapping up with a few. Yes, ma'am.
No. Sorry, I wanted to say, you know, we live in a society where action is not taken against perpetrators. We sit with the Zondo Commission, and every day, you know, we complain about action has not been taken. And I still believe, I believe strongly that action will be taken. I'm a permanent optimist. But we live in a society where it seems to be okay to do the wrong thing and get away with it. So in organizations, we must realize, I mean, our employees comes from society. So those people are in our organizations. Research that I've done in 2019 together with Paul Foster, we saw that in 2019, a third of employees in corporate South Africa, a third, personally witnessed unethical conduct or illegal conduct. But the sad thing is that only half of them, 55%, actually reported it. And the main reason, was because they didn't believe that the organization will do something. So you know, we have to really focus in organizations to get that thing right.
Yeah. And I think this is then a nice sort of parting sentiment and a few questions that we can talk about this, because a lot of our participants have already mentioned society, that word. So we talk about individuals, and whistleblowing as an activity, as an action, is an individual action. It is something that a person does, maybe with support and stuff, but it's an individual action. And it usually goes against not necessarily another individual, but let's just say a type of culture within an organization, meaning a group of people and the way that they do things within an organization. And what you just mentioned now, Liezl, is that there's also the greater society. And to be honest, if we look at a lot of these crimes, sort of the white collar crimes out there, we do not see a lot of action taken, we see protracted action, or we see light or just slaps on the wrist, meaning
golden handshake.
Sorry?
A golden handshake.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. Because a company would want to protect its reputation, maybe in a theoretical sense. Now, a company may just say to a very senior employee, listen, here's some money. We buy you out of your contract. Please just don't say anything. Now we can talk about the legality of something like that. We can talk about the ethics or morals of something like that. But I think we all agree, given that we are in this whistleblowing discussion, that that is not what we want. But then how, let's see if we can get an answer to this. How realistic is it then that if this is perhaps, like you mentioned, a societal problem, or if we then don't look at society, but we say that it's a company cultural problem, how do I as a whistleblower then go up against that? Meaning, is it fair to expect that from an individual to take up that baton? Is it then right to say it is expected?
It is probably not fair. It's not, it might not be fair. There are people in the audience that can talk about that. As an organization, we have a responsibility to create an ethical culture. Okay. Yeah. And in an ethical organizational culture, make it easy for people to blow the whistle or to talk about unethical issues before it becomes a huge issue. So that is the kind of culture that you want. But in an organizational culture where it's very difficult and where the individual will have to stand up, look, in the first instance, those companies don't expect or don't want anyone to stand up and tell the world what is wrong. Again, Brett, it goes back for me to the individual, that lone figure that has the moral courage. And moral courage is doing something, even if it's not beneficial to yourself, doing something good, even if it's not beneficial to yourself. So it's about that individual's own morals and that person's courage. And that person will know, most probably, that there is going to be some form of harm. It is maybe unfair to expect it, but also these individuals that ultimately blow the whistle will, they also do it not just for themselves, actually very seldom for themselves. They do it for the greater good of society. Yeah. And
that's no, go for it. Go for it. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Go for it.
No, and I think that's very important to understand, also from the victimization point of view. This is not a grievance procedure.
Yes.
It is not you complaining against a manager because you feel aggrieved. Most whistleblowing is about something that is not directly related to your personal well-being or
Exactly.
or your well-being. And I think that is a very important thing to understand, because a lot of colleagues may see you as a troublemaker.
Yes.
Society may view you as a troublemaker for that reason, because it's you messing with the way that we do things, perhaps, but it's not for your own individual gain. And I think that needs to be made very clear before we move on to questions. People who blow the whistle do suffer harm. They do not gain celebrity. Maybe, unfortunately, they gain infamy, if anything. And that is not something that is necessarily a positive thing. So to say that you get your name in the paper and that is why you are blowing the whistle, that's a fundamental misconception of what motivates whistleblowers, and a fundamental conception of the role that whistleblowing plays within society. So yeah, thank you very much for that last point. I have been monitoring the questions, and I've filtered them into my questions up to this point. So if there are if there are a few others who, if you guys want to in the chat room just ask a few more questions, we can go with it. Liezl, maybe if you want a closing remark before we move on to the questions, say one final thought. Okay. Yeah.
I have written a little practice guide for organizations in terms of how to manage whistleblowing, etc. And I dedicated this book, and this is my serious belief from within myself. I dedicated this book to the brave and unrecognized heroes who stood up for what is right, regardless of the consequences to themselves. And I said, you know who you are. And then I have this quote that, which I think whistleblowers can very well relate to. It's by C. Fred Alford, who wrote a book in 2001, Whistleblowers, Their Broken Lives. And he said that to be a whistleblower is to step outside the great chain of being, to join not just another religion, but another world. Sometimes this other world is called the margins of society, but to the whistleblower, it feels like outer space.
That's very well put. That's very well put. There have been quite a bit of comments, not necessarily questions in the chat room, which is very encouraging, because it speaks of people who are aware of the subject and care for it very deeply. But then also we have actual whistleblowers in the room also. And I think what is important from all the feedback is, if I had to summarize it, I have been listening to Liezl, but also throwing my eye to the chat box just a little bit, is that not protecting whistleblowers is a failure of a company, from the point of view of the company, and it is a failure of society to not protect them. And I think if someone who is not a whistleblower, if there's a way of protecting them, even if it's just moral support, or then obviously there's financial support, there's physical support, meaning physical protection also. It is, I think it is important to have more of these discussions, safe spaces where people can share their experiences, because I think if society becomes aware, or companies become aware of the actual harm that befalls whistleblowers so often, that it will change the perception of the motivation of whistleblowing, but then also what the true consequences are. And Marcel has a question, and I know there's someone perhaps in the room that has a much more structured answer to this, as someone who cares about the subject deeply in a business school. But what is the role of business schools in including transformational education? So changing mindsets and behaviors. So not only informational education. And I don't know how appropriate it is, so I'm not going to put him on the spot, but there is someone from USB who is an expert in this nature. But I think it is important to understand that business schools are crucial in supplying or providing education, not only from an informational point of view. There are specific courses like leadership and business in society at USB that focuses not only on informational education, but it is about changing mindsets, understanding behaviors. But I do feel that as a business school, and I'm not putting USB on the spot here, business schools do have a responsibility, because they are engaging with business and leaders and future leaders, to be aware of this topic and to be aware of the ramifications and the implications of these topics, and to convey that to the students. Unfortunately, a business school is only a provider of insight, knowledge, and education. It is not an implementer in a certain sense. I mean, it has a role to play physically, practically in society. But as a provider of education, it is limited in terms of what it can do within organizations. But maybe as a past student, Jermaine also attests to this, changing mindsets should be a fundamental requirement of or goal or outcome of any business school's education activity. And our MBA tries to do this. I don't think any education is ever going to be perfectly aligned with this. But I feel that having more of these conversations, creating platforms for whistleblowers, and commenting in the public sphere in terms of what protections are needed, what improvements are needed, that is perhaps something that is something that can be driven from a business school.
Mm-hmm. It's about creating. Sorry, it's about creating that awareness, because your students are going into business, somewhere into an organization, either establishing their own business or going into another organization, and you want to create that awareness of the importance of whistleblowing. And maybe they end up in a position where they can actually influence it. So as far as I know, Prof. Arnold, not sure if he's, he's been working on some ideas, I think, or at least creating awareness about it. Yeah, so, way to go. Thank you, Arnold.
Yeah, I didn't want to mention him by name by putting him on the spot. I think what is important here, Liezl, is whenever I've spoken with whistleblowers in a forum like we have here, they are thankful because they aren't afforded platforms like this very often. So there aren't a lot of places for whistleblowers for them to besides now maybe in a legal format, like in a court of law, or perhaps in a tribunal or some sort of internal process in the company. There's no place for whistleblowers to actually tell their story, or to tell people what actually happened, or what the consequences were of their action, or what their motivations were. So having more of these platforms, safe spaces, I think it's very, very important to have. And that is another place where business schools can play a role. And I think there is a risk associated with it. I don't want to, again, I'm not pointing any fingers. I'm not mentioning any names here. I need to be very careful because it's a sensitive topic. But it's a difficult thing, because even myself as a person, I would love to support a whistleblower, but at what point do I support them? Because maybe I support someone and then it turns out to be a false allegation or something like that, and then I've supported the wrong party. So that's not true. That's for the most part, Liezl, not true, because in terms of what the motivations are in whistleblowers, but what and when do we provide that platform? And I think that's a crucial discussion to have. So when do I believe someone for that their accusations or the stuff that they are saying is true or not? And maybe that level of support that we start giving at some point is not enough or too late. And I think that's also important to understand. I mean, you've mentioned Athol a few times because he's in the news now.
Yeah.
Now, I've followed Athol's story quite closely, and you know, if you say something like he did, an accusation like that, knowing Athol personally, you would want to support him. But then you also think, you know, if he's wrong, then I'm publicly, let's say on a platform like this, I'm supporting him and going against a company like Bain, and maybe that can get me into trouble. So it's a tricky subject. And I think we need to at least open up avenues for whistleblowers to speak their mind.
That is very
if
true.
I look at, yes, ma'am.
Brett, sorry, I just talking about supporting whistleblowers. What organizations forget and what they so must do is to not just say we're going to protect you, but when you have spoken up, we will give you that psychological support that you so desperately need, because that usually only comes after everything has fallen apart. Well, after the whistleblower has fallen apart, then we get to the psychological assistance. And I know that just maybe for information out there, they're nearly at the end of developing this app. It's an organization where in South Africa, where they provide access to lawyers that will handle the cases pro bono. They provide access to psychologists and so on. So, you know, that will be a great day when that is actually launched and people can use that in organizations. Okay. I'll keep quiet now because I think the time.
I think we have a few more minutes left, and I think the room is perhaps too active for this, but let's see how it goes. Yeah. If there are any persons who feel that they would want to maybe share something or ask a question, they are more than welcome to, meaning the floor is open. If someone still wants to engage on something, you are more than welcome to perhaps raise your hand, and Jermaine will just unmute you if you have a question, or maybe just a comment to make, or share something that you would want to share.
Yeah, the chat has been quite active. So
yes, yeah.
So I wouldn't know who to pick on and to ask to make a comment, but if there's anybody that specifically wants to air a view, then
let me just answer this question. It's not a question really, Devasham. Absolutely not. This is not well, yes. Maybe I should be comfortable in saying, yeah. I mean, there's always skepticism. That is perhaps a bias that individuals have, including myself. However, that topic that was raised was not raised by myself. That was actually raised by someone else in my circle, where we discussed this topic. So in terms of should we support individuals or not? And that was one of the concerns raised. So I was simply or merely highlighting a concern that could be raised or could be had by certain individuals who may want to support a colleague or a friend, and maybe why that support is lacking. And I think the whole point of this discussion is to keep the conversations going, to better our insight and understanding, in order to avoid situations like that, where that support then is given. So Devashan, yeah, there's always the and scenario here. Yes, I am always scared of my own reputation, my own self. That is true. But I would disagree with your statement there. Arnold, yes, we have a hand from Arnold Smith.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Liezl. Maybe you've put business schools on the spot and USB. So let me just say something shortly. Yes, we do deal with whistleblowing in our classes, but not in depth. Particularly by means of case studies, where I very often highlight to students that in most of the corporate scandals that we do see quite over a long period of time, there have been people who raised the flag and actually ended up in a position of whistleblowing. And the point is that nobody seemed to have cared. Nobody seemed to have listened. So eventually, that act of not listening, of not being mindful of the warning that has been extended by somebody in the lower orders of the company, somebody in a laboratory, somebody somewhere working with supply chains, somebody somewhere who needs to do some form of quality control, somebody that might be engaged in some form of contracting on behalf of the company. Once neglected, ignored, or silenced, eventually makes the company end up in public scandal. So the educational task, I think, on the flip side of having registered these dynamics, the educational task is to make our students, of whom we believe that they will one day excel and become leaders of organizations, whether in business, whether in civil society, or whether in the public sector, is to help them to understand the role of values-driven leadership, what it entails, not only in terms of themselves and their own identities and their own position with respect to that, what it means to be responsible, ethical, and so on, but also what it means to create a context in which the truth is being welcomed and where it is safe to actually speak the truth. So the educational task is not only a task of being able to analyze, identify, and finger point. It is much more a task of capacity and of making people, from an educational perspective, comfortable and courageous, but eventually also with being capable of creating cultures within which this is welcome. You have also maybe seen that I've made reference to the fact that whistleblowing is essentially addressing the shame of a company. And shame needs to protect itself. Shame doesn't want to be exposed. I don't want even my shame to be exposed as an individual. So if I can understand this from an individual perspective and learn how to be comfortable with the truth myself, when I need to be exonerated for something that I've done wrong, I can start building the systemic perspective towards relationships in families, in communities, and eventually also so in organizations. So I perhaps have one concern, Liezl, and this might be a question from my side. Whistleblowing is known as an ultimate individual act. But if we are going to continue with devising individual strategies, even by means of how the law works, we might eventually not be able to find systemic solutions for an individual challenge. And maybe we need to scratch more on that side, either through research or either that you might have perhaps some perspectives that you have found through your research in terms of successful examples of having done so, that you do have systemic solutions that align well with the law, take into account the psychosocial dimensions of what it means to be an organization, and helping organizations or organizations that can be regarded as excellent examples of having created such cultures where speaking the truth is a welcome act. and not something that will end up in a terrible place.
Arnold, yeah, is a very valid remark, and I think there is a thesis there in that whole question. So Arnold, either one for one of your students to do that research, or maybe in the audience there might be someone that wants to tackle that subject. I don't think we have enough time to discuss it at the moment.
Thank you very much for that, Arnold. Arthur is also someone who is involved at the business school. As far as I know, Arnold just completed his MBA when I started my MBA, but he's moved into sort of risk management. So I was expecting a question from him when I saw that he was on the list. Yeah, so basically, if you look at effective risk management, Arthur, maybe you want to share something on that. I mean, obviously, as a director of a company, risk management or at least identifying risks and managing that effectively is a top priority. How does whistleblowing fit into that paradigm, sort of the board director or responsibility that you have? Yeah, do you have something to share on that perhaps?
Yeah, thanks, Brett. I put quite a long comment there in the chat. But just to summarize, I mean, we've done a lot of work with risk management maturity and risk culture maturity. And we've found that items around whistleblowing are one of the key critical success factors for organizations. So, I mean, as we probably know, the board of directors is ultimately accountable for risk. You know, we're starting to see some penalties take shape. So, for example, a case we often use is Volkswagen, the Dieselgate scandal. So there were actually some Volkswagen executives that have gone to prison for that. I mean, probably not as much as we would have liked, but the actual CEO of Audi was in jail for a while. The CEO of Volkswagen is still going to go to trial this year. So we are seeing some of these kind of issues take hold. So I think, yeah, again, the whistleblowing is a good channel for the board also to assure themselves that they've created the structures and the frameworks that people can highlight these issues. I mean, obviously a board member can't be responsible if a single employee, you know, engages in fraud. But if there's no systems in place, you know, then, you know, that is an issue. And I think with Volkswagen in particular, the fraud was very systematic. And they've got lots of evidence, you know, throughout the entire organization of everyone who was involved. So I was just making a note there. I mean, there is a software, if any of you are interested in it. Nestle is using it. It's one of the big case studies. It actually came out of academic research. And it's an app that you can get for your organization. And the algorithm and everything is truly anonymous. So the employees load it onto their phone and, you know, they can point out any little thing like, you know, there's an electrical cable here. We think it's dangerous. Someone should have a look at it. You know, obviously to bigger issues of corruption and fraud and things like that. And then basically the organization sets up a team that monitors these inbound communications and they can respond to them also anonymously, say, thank you very much. We got this tip, we're looking at it. Because I think one of the big factors is, you know, people would like to have the feeling that, you know, it's been acknowledged what they've said. You know, we often see with engagement surveys and things like that, you know, we ask a lot of questions and then there's kind of just a very brief feedback. So I think that feedback loop is also very key. So yeah, this seems to be working quite well. And then again, from a risk management perspective, it really improves the risk culture of the organization, that people feel that their voices can be heard and, you know, they're actually rewarded for highlighting risk issues.
No, perfect. Thank you very much for that, Arthur, and a nice practical insight there also. And I think as a parting message from me before I thank the participant, Liezl, and for you for joining us. I think, Arthur, you mentioned there's something that's very important. It's, if you look at corporate governance, it's sort of the rules of the game in terms of how we do things in a company. And whistleblowing, I feel, is probably the most direct and probably the most effective way in which a company can keep a finger on the pulse of how things are actually being done in the organization. Meaning, if you don't have that avenue of communication open, just about anything can happen in an organization without it knowing it. So an individual action can then turn into a systemic problem. It can develop into one where more people are involved. And I think having whistleblowing as an active part of your reporting structures in a protected way is definitely an effective way for a company just to keep a finger on the pulse of what is our ethical practice, what is our moral culture, but then also what's happening with our application of systems and processes within the company. Meaning, are there wrong things happening? Is everything happening the way that we want it to happen? And that's basically what corporate governance is all about. So thank you very much for mentioning that. And unfortunately, I think I've run out of time as a speaker. I'll hand over to Jermaine now. But I want to thank everybody who, from my point of view, just all the participants for all their insights. It's a very emotive subject. It is one that I care deeply about, and I think it's one of those subjects where you have to have the courage to talk about it and be willing to make mistakes about it. So to learn more, basically. So I want to thank the USB Alumni Network and Jermaine, the Western Cape chapter, for making this opportunity available. And then I want to thank Liezl specifically. I think everyone learned a lot from your contributions. And Liezl, thank you very much for, first of all, doing what you're doing, and secondly, for sharing that information with us. So I thank everybody for their time. And Jermaine, on that note, I hand it over to you.
And Jermaine, fortunately, you're on silent, so I can just say something. You're muted. Brett and USB Alumni, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's no secret that whistleblowing is a passionate subject, and I try to do as much as I can time allowed. And I urge everyone who attended today to, just carry the flag or the flame for whistleblowers, and create platforms so that whistleblowers can actually be acknowledged for the heroes, or celebrated for the heroes that they are. Thank you very much for everyone also who attended.
Yeah, no, from the Western Cape Alumni, I think Brett hit on the head is where you challenge people's thought processes. So I think that's what we do these talks for, so that you live for the day with a whole different train of thought and thinking. And I think, like, just looking at the chat and how excited people were, but let's call it excited people were about this discussion, I think it's the best time to draw everyone's attention to the fact that there is the Alumni Connect group, where discussions like this after the fact are recorded and then posted too. And we can go and have further discussions for everybody that wants to continue this conversation. And then, yeah, and if you have any sort of suggestions for the alumni committee, especially the Western Cape chapter, please make sure to contact us via the alumni office. And yeah, I think we're coming to an end, and I think Christelle just wanted to share some words with us. But yeah, thank you so much to everybody that joined this morning. Sorry about the delay in the connections in the beginning. But yeah, I think that is the end of our morning discussion. Christelle, are you around?
Yes, I'm around. Thank you so much, Jermaine, Brett, Liezl, Arnold, Arthur, for everybody who participated in the chat box and for bearing with us this morning with our technical issues. I've got nothing more to say, just a huge thank you to everyone, and we encourage alumni to please register on usbalumni.com. Very easy with your LinkedIn profile. Janine, our career manager, is also here with us. And on that platform, you will also get the link straight through to the careers portal, where there are also opportunities to leverage. We value our alumni bringing these opportunities to us. And Brett, thank you again for bringing this knowledge to us and to share it with everybody, our students, alumni, and corporate friends. and USB staff. Amanda, thank you. Go well, enjoy the day, the rest of your day, and that's a wrap from us.